After living in Mexico City for a year, it was time to make my way back home to Canada. But to get back into Canada, I had to be vaccinated. And at the time, Mexico didn't have vaccines available for foreigners. So the game plan was to hop into Houston, Texas, get vaccinated, and then wait 14 days upon receiving the vaccine in order to be allowed back into Canada. Yet, after exploring Houston, Texas for a few days, I decided it was time to visit somewhere else. Looking on Google Flights, I found a flight to El Salvador for just $50. So, it was time to explore a little piece of Central America that I knew almost nothing about. Alright, what up? Leonidas here, coming in from El Salvador. So behind me is the San Salvador Volcano. The last eruption was about 100 years ago, and now it's just been filled in, so it's currently not active. And as you can see, I'll try to show as much as I can. There's just an empty pit, so technically it's no longer active, but who knows, maybe in a million years or so it will be. Nonetheless, I'm going to explain to you my current adventure in El Salvador. So the first day arriving in El Salvador, I arrived around 1 a.m. in the morning through American Airlines. Unfortunately, they were really late in arriving to El Salvador, to the San Salvador airport, so there were no taxis and there was no Ubers and there was no buses to get from the airport to the city center, so I had to sleep in the airport for a couple hours until I believe 8 a.m. before I could grab an Uber to the city center. So that's unfortunate. I hope one day that the city itself develops a 24/7 bus system at least to go to the city center, even if you arrive really late at night or in the morning. Nonetheless, I booked a place for 2 days in the city of San Salvador in the center and spent most of the time just walking around and taking Ubers here and there. The city itself is very small. Before this, I was living in Mexico City, so Mexico City has a population of about 20 million people, but nonetheless, the city itself is much more dense. Here in San Salvador, it was way smaller and you could pretty much get on foot from one point to the other. Obviously, I don't have to tell you to be careful for safety, but I had zero problems with safety while I was here. I walked to the city center for the most part, and in the city center is just a lot of markets. It's just at least 4 kilometers of pure markets, people selling stuff, and I walked there very peacefully with this camera that I'm recording on, as well as with my cell phone. And then there's the governmental buildings in the city center itself as well. So that was really fun to see. No one bothered me while I was walking around. No one, called me out for being a gringo, even though I'm not a gringo. Gringo implies an American, but irrelevant, just ultimately just implies a foreigner. And then after spending 2 days in the city center, I rented a car. So I rented a car for an additional 2 days, and in these last 2 days I have been riding around all of El Salvador, at least the western part of El Salvador. First up, drove from the city center to a town called Suchitoto. I would consider a pueblo mágico. So a pueblo mágico is a magical town, and I spent literally maybe 1 hour just walking around. It was fairly hot and I just drank a coffee there. There was also a funeral procession happening while I was there, so walked around a little bit, absorbed the architecture. That's something that I enjoy to look at. The various buildings, the various edifices, facades of the architecture there. And then from there I hopped back into my car and drove all the way to the Santa Ana Volcano, which was about an hour and a half drive, maybe a little bit more than an hour and a half drive through the highways and the streets of El Salvador. When I got to the volcano, I was informed that the actual tours end at 10:30 a.m. So by the time I arrived, it was already around 4 p.m. I thought I could make it and just climb up, 2 hours or so. Unfortunately, the tours were closed, and you can actually only go up there with a tour guide. So instead, I went back down the volcano and ended up staying next to the volcano in a lake called Lake Coatepec. Very beautiful lake. It was developed through volcanic eruptions over thousands of years, up to about 37,000 years ago. And it left this very beautiful lake. Highly recommended you check it out. At least stay there a night. Very beautiful. I stayed there one night in a nice little location. in a nice little hotel on the lake itself. And then in the morning, had to wake up as early as possible to make my way back up the volcano in my car, got a tour guide, and then we walked all the way up to the volcano. So the volcano itself, if you do a lot of sports, it takes about an hour and a half. Honestly, it's very easy. Honestly, did I need a tour guide? Not necessarily. The path is fairly linear, and maybe you need a half a bottle of water. It's fairly quick to get up there. Once I got up there, it was very foggy because of the season. It was a lot of cool air going up, so it was being cooled and turned into clouds. So it was hard to see for the most part, but you could see the sulfur pit inside the volcano itself. The last eruption was in 2005. Since then, it has been inactive, but for the most part, you can't climb down there anymore. So I stayed there for maybe an hour or so, walking around on the volcano, then headed right back down, another hour or so going down the volcano, and then started driving to the Santa Teresa hot springs. So that was a fun little experience. It's only about $10, and stayed there for maybe an hour or so. There's at least 40 hot springs in this location. I believe only about 10 of them are active, but nonetheless, it was a nice little decompression after climbing the volcano of Santa Ana. So you stay there in the hot springs. And the next location, which was called Ataco here in El Salvador, was about 23 minutes away. So that was much closer, and it was once again another pueblo mágico, another magical town. I walked around for about an hour, then I went up to the Mirador, the vista that you can basically see the rest of the city from, and then got out of there and started to drive down to the coast of El Salvador. So along the coast, it's probably one of the more beautiful sights that you can see, especially driving it, and because it's a very snake-like path. So you're going to the coast, and then away from the coast, then to the coast, and then away from the coast. Driving can be a little bit dangerous because it's, for the most of the journey, there's only one lane per side, so you'd have to do a lot of bypassing. So this can get very dangerous very quickly. I did have one near accident, unfortunately, but finally made it to my destination, which was one of the hotels near the beach. A lot of people do go to the coast of El Salvador to experience the beaches because they do have a really great surfing there. I'm not a surfer, so I don't know, but it is one of the things that is known for. All of these locations that I'm visited, I'm booking using booking.com or using googlehotels.com. So you go on the Google Maps and then you just type in hotels near me. And also I'm using Google Fi in order to get the Wi-Fi connection wherever I am. So once I got to the hotel, I stayed there for literally just the night, woke up in the morning, and then finally made my way over to this volcano here, which is the San Salvador volcano. Things I liked about San Salvador, as a tourist, it's been relatively safe. I haven't had any issues here as far as safety is concerned. I know they do have a reputation for gangs in the country, but as a tourist, you're only here for a fraction of that time. So the probability of you encountering something like that is very low. From what the people have told me, they really love their president, and the police here are relatively in control. So whether there's corruption or not, I don't know, but the people generally here have some respect for the police, unlike in Mexico where the police just end up robbing you all the time whenever they get a chance. So El Salvador is also a very small country, so I was able to power through the west side of the country fairly quickly. That was really nice. I do recommend you rent yourself a car if you want to see as much as possible, but if you don't worry about it. And generally speaking, since I'm a vegan, I didn't really try too much of the food. There's one really nice restaurant in the city of San Salvador. It's called Veggie SV. There's 2 locations, and I do recommend it if you're vegan. Otherwise, they have meat, shrimp, pork, anywhere you go in El Salvador. And they have this thing called a papusa, which is like this little chunky flat bread, which you can basically use to grab onto food, and then you eat it like that. And yeah, that concludes my adventure here. Now I'm gonna head back down to the city of San Salvador, stay in my hotel, and go get some vegan food. And then tomorrow morning, I head out to Costa Rica. So I hope you enjoyed that review. Make sure to leave a like, make sure to subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything that I missed as well. Leonidas here, 2021, July, El Salvador. Salute.